Great. Thank you again for inviting me to speak at this little symposium. My name's Konrad. I'm from Brisbane and back in Brisbane now, working at the University of Queensland. But some of what I'll present today was from a project at the University of Surrey in the UK, where I was for the last 2 years. I just moved back earlier this year. My talk is titled Vegetation Complexity and Urban Park Soundscapes, How Biodiversity Can Promote Wellbeing. So just to give a sort of brief overview, it'll largely focus on 2 case studies from different projects. So the first case study is from in situ urban park recordings, and it looks at how wellbeing benefits differ across urban park soundscapes and how landscape features can influence the quality of soundscapes, including bird sounds and traffic noise. And then I'll outline a little bit of a second case study that involved simulated soundscapes that kind of looked at linking acoustic characteristics with well-being, and further looked at impact of traffic noise, and then some mechanistic pathways that lead to well-being from soundscapes. So just for a little bit of broad context, we know now the majority of the world's population is urbanized or resides in cities, and in regions like Europe and Australia, that figure is already much higher, over 80 or 90%. So for many people, urban green spaces are of key importance in promoting any social and ecological sustainability of cities. And for many people, they're a principal means of contact with nature and biodiversity. And that's obviously quite an important thing when people talk about a kind of extinction of experience that might be occurring. Extinction of experience with natural areas. We know, there's widespread evidence to demonstrate that nature interactions are capable of providing a range of mental health and well-being benefits. While much of this past research has had a focus on visual stimuli, the auditory pathway is also an important aspect for nature engagement. And natural soundscapes, typically comprising bird songs or bird calls, have been shown to offer well-being benefits through the potential for kind of attention restoration and recovery from stress. And so they're kind of increasingly valued as an important resource and a cultural ecosystem service. And just to outline, when we talk about soundscapes, a soundscape basically refers to the sounds of a particular environment from a human perspective. And so it's typically broken down into 3 categories. Biophonic, so sounds from living organisms. In urban park soundscapes is most commonly birds. Geophonic, so natural sounds from a non-biological source, so wind or water flowing. And then anthrophonic, any human-generated sounds, most typically vehicle or air traffic. And so then moving on to this case study 1, urban park soundscapes, we know that urban park soundscapes are a source of natural sounds, but also typically some degree of anthropogenic noise from surrounding built urban areas. And in fact, studies show that bird songs and vehicle traffic are the 2 principal sounds that are most recognized by people when visiting parks. And so this is important because whilst natural sounds might offer potential well-being benefits, there's quite a lot of evidence to show that prolonged exposure to traffic noise can have a negative impact on health. And so from this first study had a kind of key research question of understanding how varying degrees of bird and traffic sounds within urban park soundscapes can influence any well-being benefits. And so to look at this question, we recorded in a range of parks in Brisbane to capture a soundscape that's experienced by people. We standardized the recordings and recorded along the main path, 150 meters in, and recorded for 5 minutes. Sorry, just getting a little bit of feedback. And we recorded in the morning, so 6:30 to 7:30 a.m., which is a time of bird activity, morning traffic, and in the summer in Brisbane, where it's a subtropical environment and it's warm, it's quite a common time for park use for commuters or a pre-morning pre-work walk. And so then we looked at a gradient of 8 urban park soundscapes that differed in bird sounds and traffic noise. And this is the kind of an example of some of the range of different urban parks that differed in their vegetation and proximity to a main road. And so sample 1 was then chosen to have high traffic noise, and it had very little bird activity. And sample 8 had almost no traffic noise and the highest bird activity with 7 bird species identified within the recording from their bird calls. And then the samples in between, 2 to 6, basically followed a kind of gradient of decreasing traffic and increasing bird activity. And then we ran an experiment, a repeated measures experiment, where participants listened to all 8 sound samples in randomized order and reported on their perceptions of the qualities of the soundscape and this measure of restorativeness, which is a kind of well-being measure. And so what we found quite a clear trend of greater restorative scores, perceived restorative scores for soundscapes that had increased bird species richness and decreased perceived traffic volume. And this, we basically got the identical results when we replaced these with actual measures, so with actual bird species and an objective measure of traffic volume. And then we also saw a kind of moderating effect of traffic volume. So this figure sort of shows the 8 soundscapes, and you can see the darker or the purple soundscapes there are the soundscapes with higher traffic volume, and you can see that there's reduced perceived restorative scores. So traffic volume serving to sort of offset any potential well-being benefits. So then in a sort of companion study within this project, we then wanted to look at how the particular landscape features might influence the quality of natural soundscapes, including both natural and built features, and looking at how they might affect both bird sounds and traffic noise. And we had data for vegetation density, so not just vegetation cover, but vegetation density at different height strata. So vegetation density up to 2 meters, and then between 2 and 5 meters. Then we had mean canopy height, grass cover, and water cover. So all these natural features that indicate the quality of habitat for birds, and therefore might be a source of bird sounds. And then we also had some built features, so the distance to a main road from the recording point, and impervious surface cover. And we recorded similarly in Brisbane in a range of parks, 67 parks that differed in vegetation cover and proximity to a main road. And this is a kind of overview of some of the parks. And basically from those recordings, we quantified bird volume, bird species richness, and traffic noise. So bird species richness was just quantified by identifying unique bird calls, unique bird species from their bird calls within the recordings. Traffic volume was quantified by taking the average power density following past studies, by taking the average power density within the 1 to 2 kilohertz range using spectrogram analysis. And you can see the two figures there. You can kind of see visually how much traffic noise. So in S1 is the sample with high traffic, and you can see all of the sound energy in the low frequencies there, versus S8 where there's no traffic. You can see that there's much less traffic, sound energy in those lower frequencies. It wasn't possible to quantify bird volume in the same way. Typically, you can use 2 to 8 kilohertz, but it's a little bit unreliable. And so we used a subjective measure here and then cross-checked it between different investigators. And then for those natural and built feature variables, we quantified their proportional percentage within a 500-meter radius from the recording point of each park. And our key findings there were really that we saw that this understory vegetation density between 0 to 2 meters came out as an important variable. It was associated with higher or greater bird volume, increased bird species richness, and also reduced traffic noise. So it indicated that this vegetation complexity in urban parks, and in this case particularly in the understory or the lower levels from shrubs or grasses, has potential to not only promote the diversity and abundance of birds, but also potentially mitigate traffic noise. There's kind of potential there for ecological and social benefits by producing a more sort of therapeutic soundscape. And it probably helps mitigate traffic noise because a lot of that sound energy travels at low levels. And so that vegetation density at lower levels, lower to the ground, can be somewhat attenuated. And then we also saw that, unsurprisingly, a traffic noise volume was strongly associated with proximity to a main road, and then also with greater canopy height, which again may be explained by the fact that if the canopy height is higher, then perhaps the traffic noise can propagate through the park more easily. And then just switching to this second case study, which was the project at Surrey, at the University of Surrey, titled Valuing Natural Soundscapes. Here, there was a particular focus on the acoustic characteristics of a soundscape. So whilst clearly biodiversity within the soundscape is important, depending on the specific community of birds within the soundscape, you might get a differing range of acoustic characteristics, such as the complexity or range of amplitude or intensity, and they may influence these acoustic characteristics in a non-linear manner. So it's not just a case of more types of birds with increased acoustic characteristics. It may be a sort of non-linear relationship. And then further, there's this kind of inverse U-shaped model in which moderate acoustic complexity seems to be most preferred by people, suggesting that well-being benefits may actually decline as soundscapes become too complex. So this was the key focus of this of this project, was to look at how or whether acoustic characteristics at differing levels might link with well-being, and either directly or we had this kind of theorized mediating pathway where it might be through perceptions of bird diversity and then these restorative qualities from the soundscape, or these kind of building capacity qualities. And then we also further looked at any impact of traffic noise. And here, because we had simulated soundscapes, we could overlay traffic. So we looked at traffic at two different levels, both above and below current WHO guidelines for traffic noise levels in urban areas. And so, as I mentioned, these were simulated soundscapes. They were turned out to be very, very realistic, but they were created using bird songs and bird calls from the Xeno-Canto database. And because we had a focus on assessing the acoustic characteristics, we fixed or controlled for bird species richness and abundance. So every soundscape had only three species and 5 individuals. And then from a whole lot of simulations, we filtered these down to within low, medium, and high decile bands of 3 common acoustic metrics. So we had low, medium, and high levels of soundscapes as assessed by these 3 acoustic indices. And so the first was the acoustic complexity index, which is a commonly used index, and it broadly measures the variability of bird vocalization, with greater values indicative of greater irregularity of acoustic energy. And this broadly represented complexity of the soundscape. Then the bioacoustic index, which quantifies or assesses the range of frequencies used by birds, with greater values indicative of higher differences between loud and quiet frequencies, and it broadly represents amplitude. And then the acoustic entropy index, which is indicative of how evenly sound is distributed across the sound recording, and represented intensity. And then again, we ran this experiment, an experiment where we got participants to listen to all sound samples. There were 9 in total in a randomized order. And we sent this out as a survey with these sound recordings embedded, and it was representative by age and gender for the UK. And we had a separate cohort of participants for each acoustic metric. And then we used mixed models and structural equation modeling to look at the effects of the acoustic characteristics and mediating pathways. And so what did we find? Well, we basically found that we didn't see any significant difference in any well-being scores across levels of any acoustic index. So you can see here that soundscapes with no traffic, there were no significant differences in any well-being scores from participants at either low, medium, or high. And similarly for low traffic soundscapes and high. But what we did see was this clear effect of traffic noise. So we clearly saw there was reduced well-being scores as the traffic level increased. So that indicated there was no direct effects of the acoustic characteristics, but there was some interesting findings. We saw that despite the actual species richness being fixed in all the soundscapes, we asked participants about their perceived biodiversity, and these estimates varied across the soundscapes. And it was an important factor. So as people perceived more types of birds within the soundscapes, the measures of well-being increased. And interestingly, they perceived the highest biodiversity at moderate levels of these acoustic characteristics, particularly for the acoustic complexity index. And then following this sort of importance of perceived bird biodiversity or perceived bird species richness, we ran these structural equation models for this to test for any effects, either indirect or direct, of the acoustic characteristics. And we did find this kind of indirect effect of the acoustic complexity of acoustic complexity only at moderate levels. So at medium or moderate levels, we saw that this pathway where as people then perceived more types of birds was associated with increased restorative qualities or reduced stress, which then led to higher well-being. As shown in these two diagrams. And so then just to kind of wrap up or summarize from these two studies, we saw in the first case study that actual biodiversity is clearly important. It was associated with higher well-being scores. But from both of these studies, we saw that people's perceptions of biodiversity is really a crucial factor in delivering well-being benefits. And it's probably more important than the actual biodiversity is that how much biodiversity people perceive. We saw that the naturalness of an urban park clearly has an important effect as well. So this greater vegetation complexity, in this case, particularly in the understory, can promote the bird community and may mitigate traffic noise, which likely results in a more restorative soundscape for people. But then we clearly saw the impact of traffic noise. And in that second case study, we saw that even at levels currently below what the WHO recommends for the decibel level, there was still a clear impact on any well-being benefits. And then finally, again, these moderate acoustic complexity seems to be the kind of sweet spot for people where there were the highest well-being benefits, and there was this indirect effect, again, via perceptions of biodiversity, and then the restorative qualities of the soundscape. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you for your attention.